Just admitting some people from the lobby. Just got 2 people tuned in at the moment. Sue and Ruben, just bear with us for a sec. We're having a couple of technical difficulties, but we will get started. I'll just check we're recording. Yep. All right. 1 second. We'll get underway. All right, so thank you everyone for coming along today. We'll get started. We're just sorting out some presenter issues, but I'm sure we'll get it all set up by the time I finish talking. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people, and I recognise their unique and continuing connection to lands and waters across the Adelaide Plains. I pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people visiting or living in South Australia. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So thanks so much for tuning into our webinar on coast, climate and community. We are really proud to be presenting this as part of the inaugural Adelaide Climate Action Week presented by the Local Government Association of South Australia, and acknowledging the pivotal role in this festival and beyond, delivering inspiring climate action across local councils. My name is Alfie and I'm the coordinator here at the Port Environment Centre. We're a community-driven organisation and gathering place that supports the community in living sustainably, valuing, caring for, learning about and enjoying the experience of the natural coastal, marine and estuarine environment. We believe that real change starts at the grassroots level, and our goal is to empower you with the resources, knowledge and opportunities to actively participate in environmental conservation. The Port Environment Centre is one of a network of 10 now community environment centres across the Adelaide region. If you check out our website, portenvironmentcentre.org.au, you can find links to a local environment centre in your area if you're not local to Port Adelaide. And we encourage you to check out those spaces because they're really important community assets. The Port Environment Centre is located in the heart of Port Adelaide. We're open every Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, and if you'd like to come check out what we do, you can pop in anytime. We host a range of events, and please check out our upcoming events on our website or sign up to our mailing list. We also work to support local community environmental action, which is what this session is all about. We'll be hearing from 3 different projects locally who use a community approach to blue carbon ecosystem restoration on the LeFevre Peninsula. If you do have any questions, please hold them till the end, or just put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. We'll answer all questions once all 3 speakers have finished. So we might go to Catherine. So we're changing up the running order, but we're going to hear from Catherine from the Friends of Port River. This group has been involved in many local blue carbon ecosystem restoration projects, including the Living Shoreline Project on the Port River at Yitpi Yardapultiku. This project saw the bioengineering of a natural riverbank and transplantation of intertidal plants as a pilot trial, removing the hard infrastructure to mitigate climate-driven inundation impacts in the Port River. So yeah, I'll hand over to Catherine to hear more about that project.
Thanks, Alfie. So is that visible to everyone? Oh, that's better. So yeah, I'm Catherine McMahon from Friends of the Port River. And as Alfie was saying, where the estuary is based on Kaurna land, and we've got a great representation of Kaurna culture at Yitpi Yardapultiku, which she just mentioned, which for people who don't know is the Aboriginal Cultural Centre, which was opened in June of last year. So the Port River and Barker Inlet Estuary might be well known to you, or possibly not. So the Port River runs on the on the west side of the Torrens Island Conservation Park, and the Barker Inlet is on the east side. You can see there that there's several aquatic reserves. We've also got Bird Island, which is a very important area for fairy terns and for the breeding of pelicans. We've got sort of Mutton Cove. Of course, is there in headlines, we've got the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary. And we're also located at the southern end of the Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary. And St Kilda is an important place for people to be able to see our migratory and shorebirds. So the things I'm going to talk about in relation to contributing to climate action are, as Alfie mentioned, living shorelines, blue carbon projects, the importance of maintaining biodiversity, protecting species and habitat, protecting and developing wetlands, and the blue economy. So this diagram of a living shoreline has been fundamental to the work that I've been involved in doing through Estuary Care Foundation and now through Friends of the Port River. And it was a diagram that Perry Coleman developed back in 2015, just after she'd come back from the United States and seen a whole lot of examples of living shorelines. And so she drew this one up in relation to what a living shoreline would look like in the Port River. And the thing that was really, unexpected and inspiring was that included multi-species shellfish reefs, seagrass, salt marsh and mangroves. And so much of the restoration work that I've been doing, and now OzFish is very much involved in, really was stimulated out of this living shoreline concept. So these are the elements that are the important habitats and species that are found. So seagrass, mangroves, samphires, and while what I'm showing here are Pacific oysters, what Brad's going to talk about are our native oysters. But we've actually got millions of Pacific oysters in the estuary. So we did a trial living shoreline back in 2019, which was about removing a whole lot of rubbish from in front of Newport Quays, putting down coir bags filled with Pacific oyster shell in the hope that that would establish an intertidal reef, and then transplanting mangrove seedlings. And what was really heartening was that our council picked up on the concept of a living shoreline, started incorporating it into our living environment, their living environment strategies. And then they were able to get Commonwealth funds as part of the development of Yitpi Atapultuku. And they took what had been a degraded sort of bank sort of structure, as you can see here, and work towards, well, have really outlined how it is a living shoreline can be created. And this notion of kind of making room for the Port River is something that we'd not sort of seen in a significant way. Normally what we're doing is kind of establishing hard structures and seeking to constrain the river, even though it's one of the most vulnerable areas in the states to sea level rise. So then in 2025, we transplanted mangrove seedlings and began a trial. This was led by the council involving Yitpi Atapultuku staff, the University of Adelaide and local volunteers, including myself, and a trial to improve revegetation possibilities. So what we now see is that we've got healthy algae on the shoreline. A lot of our transplanted mangrove seedlings didn't do that well for a whole series of reasons, but a lot of self-seeded mangrove seedlings are growing up successfully. And we've got salt marsh occurring on the bags that were treated with blue-green algae. So going back to the earlier slide, what you can see is that in those bags that are on the right, we've got a whole series of empty spaces. So there were 20 spaces that were bare sand, 20 that were bare coir bags, and then another 20 bags that had been soaked in a healthy blue-green algae that had come from Thompson's Beach. And then a coastal seed mix was spread across that whole area. And the reason that the blue-green algae was so important is that the EPA required that the sand that was brought in came from a quarry. So it was inert. There was no living matter sort of in it. So one of the ways that we were seeking to establish if the plants would succeed was by bringing in organic material with the blue-green algae. And it's on those particular bags that we now see our salt marsh successfully sort of growing up. And even in the most recent rains, we had some tiny babies, which was fantastic. So blue carbon, you may well be aware of this, but it includes mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses. So it's carbon removed and stored in coastal ecosystems. And this is a diagram by Renee Campbell that shows the way in which the carbon is being stored below ground in, for example, the roots of the mangroves and the seagrass. So a really important project in this whole area was one that was done at the Dry Creek Salt Fuels. This particular pond, so what you can see on the left is before the tides were enabled with a very expensive tidal gate structure to come back into a pond that had been drained. And then on the right, what you can see is the outcome of that. And it's been a tremendous example of how along the creeks you can bring back the mangroves, and then you can the salt marsh establish as well. We've got a fantastic project up the road. In fact, there's a workshop on tonight at 6 o'clock. This is one of the Green Adelaide blue carbon projects that Tony Flardy's been involved in funding. And there's fantastic resources online with research that the University of Adelaide has done, where they map out what the future scenarios can be for the St Kilda salt fields. There's a project that's further up on the northern end of the bird sanctuary, located at Webb Beach. And this again involved restoring natural tidal flows into a stranded coastal wetland, again focused on mangroves and salt marsh. Again, like the salt fields, critically important for Australian and migratory shorebirds. And this was the first project in South Australia, blue carbon project, which was registered with the Green Energy Regulator. So it is an offsets project, which we know has got some issues, but hopefully the review that's going on is going to help sort out some of those difficulties. I wanted to talk about the importance of providing and protecting wetlands, because what we've just been talking about are wetlands where you're allowing tidal flows into areas where you then have our salt marshes and our mangroves establishing. What we also need, what are critically important, are freshwater wetlands. And I've included the left-hand side because you can see there that we've actually got very little open space, particularly alongside Victoria Road. And what we have is that our stormwater system basically drains east from Military Road. So all of this stormwater is actually going into the Port River and into the estuary, which isn't desirable. It was set up as an engineering-driven solution years ago. But what's really important from a long-term perspective is actually planning and land use that is going to enable that stormwater to be captured and used, because it's a wasted resource in terms of kind of greening our local kind of environments. And it also just at present, without those kind of wetlands and better solutions, a whole lot of our community, particularly in that area that's labelled Peterhead, are vulnerable to flooding. Over on the right-hand side, you can see the wetlands, again, freshwater wetlands, Magazine Creek, range wetlands, etc. And the blue area is where the material that's coming from the Torrens to Darlington project. That's where that's going to go, which is actually potentially going to threaten those wetlands and a threatened ecological community of salt marsh, which is adjacent to it. So this is a really important project about which we're advocating. And again, it's another project that has received blue carbon funding involving, again, the University of Adelaide. And they're going to be looking at how do we deal with these issues where we want to have freshwater wetlands, but we also have the possibility through managed flows to also bring back some of the environments like we were just seeing up at Webb Beach. And where do you strike the balance sort of with that? So that's an important project to keep an eye on. One of the things I sometimes like to do, because so often it feels like we're operating in an environment where, or in a context where the environment is collateral damage to economic development. And so I like to kind of look overseas and say, where are they doing things differently? And this is the second round of what it is that's occurring in the Netherlands with this notion of making space for rivers. And as they say here, serving both the environment and the economy. Another example, because we are the major port in South Australia, is, from my perspective, what's happening in this maritime space. And you can see here that, again, this is from Europe, but a tradition that is underway. So certainly, I know Flinders Ports are looking at some of these issues. We had a presentation earlier this year at the Port Environment Forum. They're not yet at the blue economy oriented port, but at least they're in that space, sort of transitioning to a green port. But I think it's really important for businesses and companies to understand this is where the world's going, and this is where we need to be as well. And then two other examples of the blue economy. This comes from, again, in Europe, Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership, a project called Blue Shores, where they're bringing together oyster-based reefs, wooden break walls, and these bees elements, they're actually potato starch structures. And that's been trialled with a seagrass restoration project that the University of Adelaide did. But this particular configuration is something we've not just employed as yet. And on the other side, this is one about seeking to track down our microplastics and diatoms. So I just thought there are a couple of things that enable us to lift our sights from some of the daily challenges that exist in advocating for the history. And you can find us through our website and our Facebook page. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was fantastic. A very great showcase of the importance of blue carbon systems locally. So if anyone has any questions for Catherine, feel free to put them in the chat while they're still fresh in your mind, but we'll get to them at the end of the discussion. So next, we're going to move on to hear from Sandra and Bernadette from the Semaphore Largs Dunes Group. They are part of a project that is a coalition of local dunes care groups working to restore natural dune systems through vegetation management along the LeFevre Peninsula. So by widening the scope of works to encompass the entire system of the peninsula, this project takes a large-scale approach to restore and conserve the natural dunes as the best defence against the impacts of climate change. So now I'll hand over to Bernadette and Sandra.
Thanks very much, Alfie, for that introduction. So we've changed our name. It's Sandra and Bernadette, not Janice. We had some problems with technology, so we're borrowing another laptop. So we're moving over from Catherine's focus on the river and the wetlands to the coastal side of things. And what you can see there is pretty much our focus, our work to preserve the natural biodiversity of the dune system along the Semaphore Largs coast. So our group was formed in 2019. So we've been working now for 7 years. Initially, we worked between the two jetties, Semaphore and Largs, but we've extended our area starting from Hart Street in Semaphore South up to Strathfield Terrace in Largs North, where we join the Taparoo Dunes Group. Our volunteers, you see some of them there, and volunteers join our group almost every week. We're a very popular group, a vibrant group, a very welcoming group. So our Dunes volunteers don't just come out on Monday mornings. We often see people out working in smaller groups or picking up rubbish or pulling out weeds on their way to and from the beach. It's a little bit like an addiction. So mainly we take out invasive weeds. That's our main way of operating. And you can see in that slide large mounds of carpetweed or gallinia. And that was what we did pretty much at the start. Hard physical work, difficult to remove. We don't seem to have that size of invasive weeds in the dunes anymore, due to 7 years of working and employing through grants contractors to deal with those big, woody, difficult weeds. We work with other local environment groups. So on the peninsula, we try and have a joined up approach because we think that's what works best. So we join Taparoo Dunes Group. We also assist the Friends of North Haven Dunes, and we join also with the Port Adelaide Residents Environment Protection Group, PARAPEG. We also work closely with the Port Environment Centre and really value the support of all of these groups. The Department for Environment and Water, and their subsidiary Green Adelaide. We have tremendous support from the City of Port Adelaide Enfield Council. We're members of Friends of Parks SA and also Landcare SA. So why are sand dunes important? Well, they provide natural coastal protection against storm surge and high waves. And what we're seeing more frequently, particularly in the last 5 years, are not so much the big, massive storms that cause a lot of damage, but we have had a couple of those, but much more frequent storms, and combined with high tides, they have managed to breach our dune barrier in a couple of spots, which is a particular worry. The dunes provide a barrier against wind and sea spray. They often keep the sand from blowing into people's houses, which is important. They're a great habitat to many plant and animal species. The dunes, and we've worked now probably for the last 4 years in increasing the biodiversity of the plants in the dunes to build up their sustainability. They have their own system of managing themselves in terms of where the sand comes from and how the sand can dissipate wave energy. Dunes are not static, they're constantly evolving. Dunes are strengthened when they're held in place by plants, but they're weakened when the plants are lost due to erosion, and also the wrong type of plants getting in there. We've had an invasion of sea wheatgrass, which is not effective like the spinifex is in holding the dunes stable. Coastal dunes protect plants and animals. They built environments further inland. I've talked about the frequent storm surges due to changing climate. Along with the other coastal environment groups, our Dunes Group aims to create and maintain a green corridor for plants, birds, insects and animals to freely move throughout the peninsula and further south as well. And in all of the work that we do, we recognise the cultural importance of the dunes and the coastal areas to the Kaurna people. This is just a slide which outlines funded work that we've been undertaking during the time that we've been operating. We're very appreciative of the opportunity to apply for grants. And you can see there a list of the grants that we've received over the years, and we're currently waiting for a decision about another grant application that we've lodged with Green Adelaide. So we do this in conjunction with the other groups on the peninsula. So why is native vegetation in the sand dunes important? Well, it maintains the existing species diversity, it provides wildlife habitat for the things that should be there, it defines the character of South Australia's coastal landscape. Many groups visit our area and really admire the difference to inland landscapes or indeed coastal landscapes in other parts of the metropolitan coast. So native plants and animals are beneficial as food, of course, and medicinally. Retention and regeneration of native vegetation plays a key role in dune sustainability by helping to avoid salinity and soil erosion problems, providing windbreaks, providing shade and shelter for wildlife and pollinating insects. It provides a seed bank for future revegetation projects, and we're engaged in a lot of propagation for local schools, other community groups, and through the Green Adelaide Nursery at Two Wells. Native vegetation stores carbon. That's an important aspect of the native vegetation that's there. At a local scale, it provides a cooling effect, most important with rising temperatures. And also importantly, our dunes area, our native habitation and our native vegetation provides a healthy environment for people. So studies have shown that being outdoors in the natural environment provides many health benefits. And we saw this particularly during COVID when we were confined. Small groups could still get out in the dunes. For many of our volunteers who are retired and live alone, it's an important opportunity to come together and feel like we're contributing and enjoy being in a native environment. So weeds, which are our main target in the work that we do, are a problem because they compete with native plants. They prevent germination of native species. If you think back to those rolled up carpet weed piles, those weeds in particular prevent the native species from popping up. And the way that we work is to target the most invasive weeds, take them out, and then wait and see what the seed load is in the soil. And with a little bit of rain, we can see the native seedlings coming up, which is really pleasing. It's important to have shade as the temperatures warm, as the earth warms, and also weeds can change the character of the soil. They can change the native vegetation habitat, meaning there's a loss of food for critters and insects. They change the shelter that's available to native species. Weeds disrupt and displace local fauna through loss of habitat. They create suitable conditions and habitats for pest animals, and we identify them on a regular basis. They pollute gene pools of local species. We see hybrids developing in the dune system. They make the area inaccessible for the control of feral animals. So here you see some photos of some of our lovely plants. So you can see the red one on the left is running postman, and there are many areas where this is doing extremely well, and it's always great to stumble upon a patch of running postman. You can see the native pigface, the purple flowered one, and underneath that is a photo of a saltbush, and they do extremely well in our dunes as well. Some of the flora and fauna that's supported by plants in the dunes. So we can see a nankeen kestrel, an admiral butterfly, and the blue-banded bee, which we've been planting fairly intensively, Adriana's, which is their particular preferred plant. And lastly, this is just one example of a beautiful species that lives in the coastal environment, the painted dragon. And at the moment, we're observing and assisting where we can Green Adelaide as it captures some of these colonies from areas where development is taking place, like the submarine training area, and trialling, relocating these colonies to other areas and monitoring their survival rate. So that seems to be working well. They're a beautiful creature. We love seeing them when we're out. And they're a good example of why we do the work that we do. So thank you very much. I look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Sandra and Bernadette. You know, it's very warming and wonderful to have such a well-organised and active local group that's so inclusive. Yeah, I can't wait for the day that I can come out on Monday mornings with you both. And now we'll move on to our final speaker. Oh yeah, if you have questions for Sandra and Bernadette, we'll get to them after Brad. So we'll move on to our final speaker for this webinar. We'll hear from Brad from OzFish Australia about their community involvement in seagrass restoration projects. The Seagrass for Snapper and Blue Swimmers projects, so there's two different ones, sees community members out on the beach collecting and propagating seagrass to restore meadows in the Port River and Adelaide coastal waters. Seagrasses are vital for the marine ecosystem, and I'll hand over to Brad now to explain more about their importance and how community collaboration is helping to bring back the meadows that we've lost.
Thanks, Alfie. Bear with me and I'll hopefully this will work.
Yeah, looking good.
Cool. You can see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Excellent. So thanks everyone for attending. I guess I'm going to be talking a bit about seagrass restoration work and why seagrass is so important. So first and foremost, if you haven't heard of OzFish, we're a fishing conservation charity. We mainly work with the recreational fishers and local community members to support waterways, particularly fish habitats. And locally, I mainly work with the Adelaide OzFish chapter, who are a group of fantastic volunteers. Been around, I think, in SA since about 2020, and we do a lot of projects beyond seagrass, particularly shellfish reef, salt marsh, mussel beds, and a whole bunch of other habitats. But today I'm just going to be talking about seagrass and local seagrass work. So if you're not familiar with seagrasses, I should say, they're true flowering plants. So they're evolved from land plants that have adapted back into the ocean. So being true flowering plants, they produce flowers. Those flowers will turn into either seeds, seedlings, or fruit. And they produce these really extensive root mats. So just like, I guess, turf, turfing grass, but for the ocean, mainly adapted for soft sediment environments, with a couple of exceptions. And South Australia supports 11 different species of seagrass. It's a really important ecosystem in the Gulfs. And they're really important for biodiversity and for fish. So they're a really important habitat as nurseries, providing shelter and foraging habitats for a lot of South Australian recreational fish species. So most species that you'll probably think of, everything from calamari to blue swimmer crabs to whiting to snapper, etc. Most of those species will use seagrass as either some or all of their life history. So they're a really important ecosystem that OzFish focuses on, mainly for that fish habitat benefits. But of course, they're really important in the context of climate change, in mitigation and coastal protection as well. And that's because seagrass are really important to reducing wave energy on the coast. So what the actual, I guess, the leaves or the fronds of the seagrass plants, they take a bunch of that energy. So the wave energy is hitting the seagrass and it reduces the amount of energy that hits the coast. So that provides two benefits. One is less coastal erosion by having healthy seagrass systems. So that's less sand being removed from beaches. And they also tend to accumulate sediment and organic matter as well. So the sediment hits the seagrass, drops into it, and the seagrass keeps growing over years and on top of that, which means it actually builds up the amount of sand or sediments in the nearshore environments. And of course, if we lose our seagrass, we get the reverse occurring, where we get higher wave action and we end up with shoreline erosion, which we've seen a lot of along the Adelaide coast. And part of that is because of the seagrass loss, which I'll talk a bit more about in a sec as well. They're also really important as blue carbon ecosystems. They're probably one of the most important habitats. So they sequester carbon 30 times faster than tropical rainforests. And while they account for a very tiny fraction of the seafloor, they make up about 10 to 18% of the total carbon storage in the ocean. A majority of that is organic matter that is trapped in the sediments around the seagrass. So when the seagrass rack washes up on shore, that carbon is released. And same if we see that seagrass dying back. So it's really important to maintain healthy seagrass meadows out in the water, out in the environment. And South Australia has a couple of, I'm going to say, groups of pretty recognizable seagrasses. First and foremost, the tapeweeds or Posidonia. They tend to be the really big seagrasses that you'll find along much of the coast. We also have eelgrasses. Those are much more common inside the Port River and in West Lakes, where it's much more sheltered environments. We also have wireweed or amphibolus. Those are really unique because they grow not only on bare sands, but also on rocks and on reefs. They're very tolerant of high wave action, so you see a lot of them down on the southern part of the Adelaide coast. And we also have paddleweeds or Holophora species, and they tend to hang out in a bit deeper water. And we've got some of those off of Largs as well. So Adelaide Metro Coast has lost about a third of its seagrass since about the 1950s, and that's occurred pretty much along the entire Metro Coast, largely in the inshore zone, and a lot of that is due to stormwater pollution, and I guess decisions that were made, without that consideration of the environmental implications. So historically, a lot of wastewater, stormwater, industrial outputs were all just flushed out into the ocean, out of mind, out of sight. and that had pretty negative impacts to our local seagrass meadows. So that combination of excess nutrients, sediment, and coloured organic matter has been associated with die-offs of seagrass along the Adelaide coast. So some of that is because there's less light and seagrass need to photosynthesize. It also promotes the growth of epiphytes, which is a furry brown or red stuff that'll grow on the outside of the leaves. And like you can see on these photos, that results in the seagrass becoming stressed and then dying back. And then once you lose the blades, if they're no longer able to photosynthesize, the roots in the meadow will start to erode and disappear. Thankfully, since about the 2000s, there's been a lot of water quality improvements. So we've actually seen a net regrowth of about 11,000 hectares, which is a huge amount of area, especially in sort of the further offshore, where those impacts are, where there's the least amount of those impacts. Where restoration and natural recovery has been limited is in the nearshore zone, closest to the sand dunes, or the coastline, I should say. And that's because of that higher wave energy that's sort of a result of the seagrass loss. So it causes this negative feedback loop, which makes it really hard for seagrass to naturally recruit into those areas. Not to mention there's still impacts and stresses like stormwater events every now and then. So those can be a couple of limitations. And that's where, I guess, Seeds for Snapper restoration comes in as a sort of a community approach to addressing the seagrass loss and supporting recovery in the nearshore zone. So Seeds for Snapper is a program that's been funded by Green Adelaide since about 2020, and it focuses on the Posidonia seagrass plant. So we work with about 4 different species, but they all, relatively speaking, look the same. So our native seagrasses, they produce these fruits over summer from about mid-November to February. They look very much like green olives and they're buoyant. So what that means is that they float up to the surface and ideally will split open somewhere to release a single seedling and establish. Or they wash up onto local beaches where naturally they would basically all just die off and turn into wrack. So what Seeds for Snapper does is we rescue and intercept the seagrass fruits. So each summer, our community members, volunteers are out collecting seagrass fruit from along the entire Metro coast. Those fruits are then dropped off into eskies and then find their way up to the Cruising Yacht Club, where we have seagrass tanks, where we then mature the fruits into seedlings. So they split open into those seedlings, which is what we actually work with. And since we've started the program, we've planted over 60,000 seedlings with more than 7,000 volunteer hours that have gone into the program, because it's a massive undertaking along the entire Metro coast. So in terms of the planting, we plant them into Hessian sandbags, which provide, I guess they're biodegradable, but they also provide an anchor in that system. So if we were to just throw the seedlings out, which is what OzFish does in our Western Australian project, in the case of Adelaide, because we've got a lot of high wave energy, those seedlings would just wash up on shore. So we plant them into sandbags to hold them in place. And then hopefully some of those seagrasses survive and grow into the clumps that you see here as well. And this year, we've also managed to get some support from the South Australian government surrounding following the harmful algal bloom to undertake some seagrass restoration trials using seagrass fragments. So that's using the whole plants that naturally will wash up, particularly over winter with storms. So they're bits of seagrass that wash up that are still bright green, healthy, and have their roots attached, like what you can see here in the photos. And what we've been doing over the last few months is going out with community and collecting those seagrasses, or having volunteers collect them and then drop them off at Westlake. So we've had some floating baskets. And because they're an aquatic plant, they've been kept in water the whole time, and then transferred to West Lakes. So West Lakes connects into the Port River and the Gulf St. Vincent. So they are marine waters, which means that seagrasses should hopefully be able to take off in the West Lakes as well. They naturally occur in there just down the southern end. So we're planting them in a few different locations to see if we can get them to take off in West Lakes to create more fish habitats. So we've been targeting of collecting over 1,000 fragments, planting them using a combination of different methods to just see what might work in this system, and then planting them across 6 sites. So we've already planted over 500 seagrass fragments, and we're hoping to plant the next 500 over the next week or so. So I guess to summarize, seagrass meadows are incredibly important fish habitats and blue carbon ecosystems. So working with them is, I guess, from a restoration and conservation standpoint, is essential to protect our coastlines, both the physical beaches, but also in that climate mitigation with reducing carbon. And OzFish Adelaide chapter have been working to restore and support seagrasses, and we're really keen to be continuing this work over the coming months and hopefully into the summer as well. So if you're interested to get involved with our work, our seagrass restoration tends to be quite seasonal, so Seeds for Snapper will hopefully start at the end of November. So just keep an eye out for updates for that. Around the rest of the year, you can, of course, support seagrass restoration through citizen science, sharing photos of seagrass meadows and seagrass plants, both above and below the water. That's been really helpful with understanding when and where we can collect seagrasses, and also supporting our winter trials. So while we are wrapping up our West Lakes project, we're set to hopefully have a planting day next Wednesday, if the weather is good. And you're welcome to check out our website and sign up as a volunteer. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Brad. That's great. Another way you can get involved with OzFish, we're running an event with Brad coming up for Science Week in August. No, I've got November seed collecting in my mind, but 20th of August we'll be out doing salt marsh monitoring, which is exciting at near the Living Shoreline Project that Catherine mentioned at Yipi Yardapul Tiku. So thanks everyone. We've had a couple of questions, but I think from Sue Sunderland, but I do think that they were mostly covered. Not sure if either Sandra or Brad wants to touch more on the questions in the chat.
There's one about the algal bloom, asking what the impact was on the seagrass.
On the seagrasses, yeah.
Yes, Sue's asked that. So Brad might like to chat to that.
Yeah, so I can talk to that. So because we have different seagrasses and different environments, we've had different impacts. So it seems that we've had some seagrass loss with some of the Zostria, so the eelgrasses, which are some of the intertidal seagrass communities. So that's been noticed inside the Port River. So that's because when the bloom came through, we obviously had a lot of things dying in the water, which produced a lot of nutrients, and that caused a macroalgal bloom, which has smothered those communities. But in saying that, the subtidal seagrasses, so our Posidonia and Amphibolus, or tapeweed and wireweed communities, seem to have fared fairly well. So we haven't seen any seagrass loss for those at this stage. But of course, there's a lot of research looking at those potential long-term impacts from the bloom and some of the toxins that are produced as well.
Great, thanks, Brad. And I think Sandra wants to mention about the animals in the dunes as part of the restoration efforts there.
Yeah, thanks, Alfie. The dunes support quite a diversity of animals, so definitely reptiles. We do see the odd snake, and often when people are passing by, particularly in summer when we're working, they're prone to yell out, "You shouldn't be in there, there's snakes in there." So we're well aware of that, but mainly they avoid us and we avoid them. So in terms of lizards, again, there's hardly a week goes by that we don't see different lizards in the dunes, and that makes us happy. Everyone, of course, wants to know about the foxes. So it's well known that there is a colony of foxes that inhabit the metropolitan coastal area. Certainly, they're prolific along our part of the dune system. We, in past years, have monitored dens and noted them on an app that we have. And Council also has a program to, I guess, monitor and also control fox dens along the coast. It's not a pleasant topic. People get quite fond of the foxes. We see them around our suburbs. They're looking for food, of course. But they are a pest and they are harmful to the other creatures in the dunes, and they really shouldn't be there. So there is now a contractor who can track those dens much quicker than we can with trained dogs that sniff out where the dens are. And then there's a process using different chemicals to euthanize the foxes. I think the colonies are going down, but they certainly have not been eradicated altogether. One thing to think about that we turn our minds to is if the foxes are eradicated, will we see an uprising of feral cats? So now and again, we do see a feral cat, but they live there at their own peril, I think, when the foxes are around. But it'll be interesting to see as the foxes reduce, do other predators step into the dunes. We'll keep monitoring that and keep our eye on it. I can't comment on how many foxes we're talking about. There are certainly groups spread quite evenly along the coast. They are more prolific around food outlets. They're not silly. We see foxes walking around with pizza boxes in their mouths. They gather around car parks where people are prone to leaving food around and so on. I can't give a definitive answer about how many we're talking about, but I think they're on the decline.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. And I think that looks like everyone's questions have been answered. So if you do have a burning question, put it up quickly. Otherwise, I'd like to say a really big thank you to all of our presenters. Thanks for taking the time to share about your projects, and especially through this special lens of climate action this week. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. I will send links out with more information about each project to everyone that did register. So I really encourage you to get involved if you can with any of these projects. Some of them are as simple as walking along the beach and collecting little seagrass seeds if you're already there. And make sure that you check out the rest of the program for Adelaide Climate Action Week. There's events running through to the end of Sunday, and plenty more exciting things to learn about in your local area. So I can see someone typing. I'll just hold my, oh no, they've stopped. Oh, typing again. I'll hold my horses in case it's a burning question. And otherwise we'll be wrapping up. Hopefully they're a fast typer. Oh, thanks, Sue. Yeah, it is really special to have so many active groups locally really working and fighting to protect the amazing environment that we do have. All right, it looks like the question might have been, they might have changed their mind, but if anyone does have a question, just email it through to me and I'll connect you with where it needs to go. So yeah, thank you, and I'm going to end it now. See ya.